All right, everyone. How is it going tonight? As you all know, Jess is traveling for the North Carolina Pottery Conference. And so I am going to be hosting live at 5. And Alex from Alexandria Pottery Co. has so graciously offered to step in and help us provide some content for you folks tonight. And so without any further ado, I am going to send it over to Alex. Alex, how are you doing?
Hey, we're doing fine. Didn't we just do this? We'll come back every week. This is so much fun. It's good to see everyone. Okay, so can I just take it away, Kev? You ready for me to go
Yeah, go ahead
run
and do
with
your
it?
thing.
Okay, I do want to say before we get started, we do have a coupon code that I forgot to mention to you, Kevin. It's Shaker15. So there'll be 15% off all tools from now until the 10th, the 5th through the 10th. So if anyone has any questions about that. Okay, so we were just hanging out last week, I think, was it last week for ClayShareCon, and we were showing our Faceted jigs, which is our new set of jigs that we just launched. And one of the projects that I showcased was our salt and pepper shaker, which I've just absolutely fallen in love with this project. It's so quick and so easy. It takes the tiniest amount of clay. So if you don't have a toolbox of just scrap clay projects, this would be a really great one to start adding that. I don't like to waste clay. I actually don't like to reclaim clay. So I want to use as much of my slab as I possibly can. So this salt and pepper shaker project uses a small amount of clay, and it takes up a very little footprint in your kiln. So if you need those small pieces to kind of fill in gaps, these are really great for that. So I think what I'll do is I'll have Scott switch to my camera angle and we'll get started. I'll show you how to make these cuties. Okay, so this, because it's a salt and pepper shaker, it comes in a set. So you will need to have two of everything cut out. I'm going to show you the smooth construction today. So that will be a naked slab, no texture. And then I will also show you the textured construction. There's just a little bit of a difference when it comes to using our jig, texture versus non-texture. So I have two of the main piece cut out. You can get this template for free on our website, alexandriapotteryco.com. It's under our extras tab, and then just go down to template. And this little guy, you don't have to adjust anything. You don't have to print two. It's so small. You just print one. And for the salt and pepper shaker, you don't have to add any extra clay. This will do it for you. Our salt and pepper shaker set, when you order the set, it comes with a bottom cutter and a top cutter. We are closing this all the way in to keep our salt and pepper in. So you will get the cutter for the top and then the cutter for the bottom. So I'm just going to kind of scooch those guys aside. And this is our petite size. This is what we're going to be using today. And I originally made this to make juice cups for my kiddos. Then my good friend Amanda said this would be a great salt and pepper shaker. It turns out she is brilliant, and she's right. So this will also make a small, I think this is a 4-ounce cup. So if you do want to make just juice cups, you can use the same cutter for that, and then you just don't want to add a bottom on that guy. Okay, so we are going to start with our little naked slab here. It drips some water on there. And I have just been using a speedball brayer to smooth both sides. I roll my slab now to about 1/4 inch to start. You'll want to account for a 1/4 inch slab around our jig. So if this is your first time using our jig, just make sure that after all your texture is said and done, you're at about 1/4 inch to wrap around that little guy there. So I am going to dust this with cornstarch. This gives us our release agent. This is such an important step. My clay is it's wet. It's been sitting under plastic for a few days. It's not leaving a sticky fingerprint behind. It's wet enough where I can still kind of flop it down, but not so wet that it's leaving a sticky fingerprint. So we're working on figuring out the moisture content of the clay. Scott's working on finding a meter to do that. And I think it'll be really neat if I could give you an actual moisture percentage. We don't have that yet. So we're going to dust really good with the cornstarch. I am going to remove all the extra from my work surface. With the construction of the naked slab, you do not want any cornstarch on the other side. So I am going to bring my jig in front of the clay, and I'm going to easily rock this up. It's such a small piece of clay, it's really easy to handle. And then I am going to involve my banding wheel right away. Let me get that guy over here. You're really going to need the capabilities to spin your clay around. So use your banding wheel or a Lazy Susan, whatever you use in studio. The important part before we even start sculpting the shape in is to line up one edge of your clay with one of the edges of the jig here. I'm just going to pull this out for a second. We want to line up our seam against one of these ridges, and that will help us to completely erase that seam. We're going to hide that guy. So I'm going to eyeball this. We are going to have clay moving because we're going to be smushing it a whole bunch, but we do just want to make sure that that's where the clay is closing against one of those. So as I wrap my clay around the jig, I'm making sure that it's making contact all the way around. This little back part here is the tricky part. That's usually the part that's sagging a little bit away. I'm going to lift this for you. You just want to make sure that the clay is making contact all the way around. So once I have that established, I'm going to come in. I don't want to put too much pressure at this point because the bumps in my hands against this naked slab will leave a lot of bumps and divots. We don't want to do that. We just want to start lightly pressing at the transition point. Just going to pull one of our big ones over here. You can see there's this transition point right there. That's where we're putting pressure, right here in this area where it goes from round to flat. It's really easy to find because you can see the flat parts through the top. So you just want to go ahead and start at that little transition point there. I am going to start laying in my facets from the back and then move towards the seam. Because of the pressure that we're putting on the clay, you want the clay to be able to move. That's why we're not going to close this seam up right away. So I'm going to start at the back. I would normally just do this facing away from myself, but for you guys, I'm going to spin and I'm going to start at the bottom. And I'm just going to start smushing the clay in when I feel that bump right in there. You can feel where it starts transitioning. As soon as I feel that little slope, I give it a lot of pressure, and then I'm going to move over to the next side here. You don't want to go over your ridges. You want to leave those poking out because that's where the glaze is going to break really nicely over this. And then it's just a matter of sculpting and smushing at this point. I'm going to go ahead and just start putting a lot of pressure. Sorry if my hand's in the way there. You will get dings and bumps here because we're using the red rib. I tend to knock this area down here. It doesn't go in deep enough to make an issue for glaze. We will come through with a sponge, and that's just part of our finishing work. So I don't fuss too much about that, but I do try to start as close to the bottom as I can. And as you do this, the clay will start squeezing upward. So we are going to make sure it's nice and even at the top in a couple steps here. So I'm going to just come around. It's kind of hard to get this front flap. You're just going to kind of push the clay that's closest to you in, and then just start laying that in. Once we get this seam buttoned up, that'll be a lot easier to get to there. So we're just going to do our best around the seam, and it's already starting to take a cute little shape. I do this, the softer the clay, you can work this with really soft clay too, which is nice if you want to freshly roll it. That would work out for this. I would just make sure I have plenty of cornstarch on the inside as well. So now I've got my preliminary shape in. You can see those pretty little ridges in there. So we are going to, and you can see through the top, we're starting to make a little more contact. So now I know it's time to button up this seam. So I'm going to come in and we're going to just follow that ridge. So I'm going to take my knife here and I'm just going to follow the ridge that we lined up the clay in the beginning. I'm going to follow that all the way down.
Hey, Alex,
it's a really,
question for you.
Dear. Yeah.
How many pounds of clay do you think gets used for one set of these?
How many pounds of clay?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a really great question. I roll out, I've never weighed, geez, babe, what do you think? I'm going to ask Scott how much clay I roll out at a time. I'd say 8 pounds at a time, if I had to guess. And then out of that big slab, I get 4 of the large jig. So you could probably, oh boy, 16. It's such a small project. So for this one, I'm gonna, I wish I had a better number for you, but if you wanted, I bet you could roll out a pound of clay and get a pair of these out of there. I would love to hear if someone weighs their clay and tells me. That would be awesome information to have. Sorry, I don't have a better answer for that. I don't really go by weight when I roll out the clay. I usually only go by weight when I'm throwing on the wheel. Helpful, not helpful?
That already told me way more than I would have known about it.
Okay, good. Okay, good. But now that someone has asked, I will try to next time I roll out my slab, see. But I will have Scott, can you measure this? I'll have him measure the template for you so you know at least how many inches you'll need for that. So I'm just doing my bevel cuts here. This is your standard assembly for any seams. You're just going to go, whoops, you just cut off way too much at first. Just keep the same angle on both sides so that it lays nice and flat. We are going to really smush this seam anyhow, so it's going to blend in nice, nice and easy for us. So now that I've got that lined up mostly, we're still not going to attach at the seam. I just want to make sure that we've got contact all the way around before I commit to that. And because this project is so small, it's easy for you to get your full hand around. And I think that's close enough for demonstration's sake. So I'm going to go in here and slip and score. Okay, I think Scott has the measurements. So the template is 8 by 4.5 inches. So if that'll give you a better idea of what you need for the amount of clay. 8 by 4.5. What'd I do? Okay. So I'm going to add my slip on. And I try to add my slip on the clay that's furthest away from the jig. If you are having sticking issues, it could be because your slip is getting in between your clay and your jig and you're creating a little bit of a glue. So we just want to make sure that when we're buttoning up this seam, we're not getting that slip in between. And then I'm going to use the really flat part of my hand. I'm not going to use my fingers because I don't want to create too many dents. And I'm going to button up this seam. So now that that's closed off like that, I will take my red rib and we will start erasing that seam there. It's a lot easier to get the seam invisible in the faceted portion, that flat part, than it is at this, the round part. So you may have to do more work at your finishing step for that. So now that I've got this completely closed form, I'm going to support the clay from the back and I'm going to now smush up some more. Now that we've got it completely closed up, we want the clay to have no choice but to move up. We don't want it to move out because that'll make it kind of saggy. And the whole purpose of this project is to see those really nice defined flat portions there. So I'm going to go around one more revolution. Just going to look through the top. It helps me to see where my flat sides are. And then I'm going to take off some of this top part so I can see how close we are. So right here at the seam, I'm going to notch out just a little V or a little U. I feel like it's easier to notch it out like that than just stick the knife in. I'm going to support the clay from the back. And as I hit the corners, I'm just going to turn my banding wheel. My clay knife is staying really flat. Using this guide, using the jig as a guide is really great because you'll always have a level bottom. So if you're having trouble with your work being off or wobbly, it really helps to have that guide there. So I know we have a little more work to do here because of the gapping that we have around our little salt shaker. So now that I can see it more clearly, I know what I need to do. I'm just going to come around and do this until I am content with the thickness of the clay and until I am happy with how flat my sides are. I'm just using my left hand or my non-dominant hand as a guide here. I'm not putting so much pressure that I'm denting the clay. There's a lot less forgiveness when it comes to clay that doesn't have texture in it because you can really see everything. But the effect, the finishing effect is really nice. And you can stamp on jig. So if I wanted to stamp this, I could do it with the jig inside, and that gives me really great counter pressure. So even that last revolution, I've picked up some more clay at the top. I'm going to do the same thing here. And I'm going to go all the way around to get that top nice and flat. All right. Because our jig is so small, you can see we've really taken shape there. There will be a tiny bit of gapping with the salt and pepper shakers. I just take my hand in at this point and just kind of sweetly convince the clay to go where it needs to go. If you want to take a paddle at this point too, you can do that. Just this jig is so small, it's a little harder to get the clay 100% flat like when we get the big one. But that is pretty good. I'm happy with that all the way around. So I'm going to score this top while it's on jig. It's just easier to do at this point. These smaller projects are a lot easier to handle than the bigger projects. So when I take the jig out of here, it does, oh, hello, or it just slides out. When I take the jig out of there, it's easier with the little projects not to smush your flat sides. When you get to the bigger one or large form, you really want to be careful not to smush that too much. So I'm going to flip, and we're going to do to the top what we did to the bottom. but technically this is the bottom of our shaker. So I should have mentioned, and when I get into our textured portion, there is a top and bottom to this project. So when you are rolling out your texture, if you do want a part, if you do want a certain directional for that, make sure you are planning that out in the beginning when you're cutting your template, because we do construct this upside down and that can get confusing if you have a directional pattern. So my top is looking really good. And you're gonna treat your seams, just make sure everything's nice and blended. Anytime I smush the clay, I just release. And then I would also score this part too, because this is technically our bottom, and we are going to attach a point here too. So you saw my jig is already released. I'm going to show you the textured portion. So I'm gonna actually set this little guy aside, but we will get back to this point of taking care of our inner seams and putting the top and bottom on with our next little guy. So Kevin, if we have, while I am smushing my texture, if there's any more questions, we can chat at this point.
The big one that people are interested in right now is how are you going to do all of that forming for the facets without losing all of your texture. So people are waiting to see what you're about to do.
Let's do it. Okay, that is a great question. Again, clay wetness is going to be a big deal here. If you are touching your clay and you're leaving a wet fingerprint behind, you will likely lose more texture at this point. I have been rolling texture on both sides of my clay through my slab roller. You can kind of see it here with the cornstarch. So my texture is really deep. When you are putting in texture for this project, make sure your texture is really deep, really even. You really want to smush it in there. You will end up losing just a little bit of your texture, but if it's deep enough, it will be of no consequence. You'll still have plenty of texture for the glaze to break over. So you will lose a little bit, but if your texture is really shallow, if you have a really shallow print or impression, then you will have more issues at this point. But the key is here to not have sticky clay. And also the key is here, I'm going to use a couple tools to help me roll in those sides. But preliminarily at this point, I am just going to use the warmth of my hands, and I'm going to find that transition point. And I'm not closing my seam yet. I'm just kind of laying in that transition point to get the clay used to what I want it to do, to give it a little bit of that memory. So we aren't going to take a rib to this because that would absolutely destroy our texture. But what I found works really well is a clay paddle or a really tiny roller. This is a 1.5 inch brayer from Speedball. And again, I'm going to start at the back, and I'm just able to lay those sides in really easy that way. Now, if your texture isn't as deep as this, I would do more hand work before I would pull out this little roller, or I would rely more on my paddle from my clay paddle. So I have a really big clay paddle. I think I need to get a smaller one, but you get the point. This is such a small project. I'm able to come through. And this, the textured salt and pepper shaker go a lot faster than the non-textured. You can see even now, I have those little flat sides in here. We haven't buttoned up our seam yet, so I will get these flatter, but you can see that shape is already in there. And that's just from mostly from the pressure of my hands in that tiny roller. So now that I'm happy, I'm getting more contact all the way around. I'm gonna close up the seam, and then we'll really put more pressure on it to make sure that our sides are nice and flat and defined. So I've already got my beveled cut on one side. I just have to match that cut on this side. We won't be able to erase this seam quite as well as with the smooth clay, because the smooth clay, you can take the red rib and really just get it in there. So you will see a little bit of a seam. Let me see if I can find my seam here with the texture, but I don't mind that. And I did want to also say, mind where your seam is going to be versus where your top is. On this little set that I made, I put the holes in the front, and my seam is facing out. That's something maybe no one else would notice. I noticed that. I want to make sure when we put the top on, my holes are in, that I've got the holes facing a really pretty side, and my seam is to the back. So I honestly, these are for demo. These will be that's my own set, so it's fine. But that's just a tip from me. It does matter where you put your lid on versus where your salt and pepper hole are, if you don't want to see that seam facing forward, which I think most of us would try to keep the seam facing back. I think that makes sense. So I'm going to score both sides. And with my texture that I choose to use on these, it does hide the seam, I feel like, a fair amount. So if you're a very technical potter, you could get your seams to line up. This is like a gift wrapping. This should tell you everything you need to know about how I wrap birthday or Christmas gifts. I don't line anything up. I just kind of like where it ends up is where it ends up. But some people are really talented and they can get that seam to line up where you can't even see it. Let that part shine. Let your talent shine in this arena here. So that, I feel like with this texture, hides it really well. So I'm just going to make sure I'm applying enough pressure where my slip is coming out. And then I'm not neglecting this bottom part here. We don't want to leave that flapping in the wind. And then I'm going to take my 1.5 inch roller and I'm going to continue my way up. Super easy with texture. I will carve, I do still make quite a bit of these without texture because I like to carve into the clay. So I do it equally. I would say I probably do 50% texture, 50% not. But if I want a really quick way to do it, I do use the texture. So I'm going to notch out that U there, lay my knife nice and flat, supporting the clay from all sides. And then when I hit the corner of the jig, I just rotate. It's a little bit different than a circle at the top because you want those sides to be nice and defined. Part of the cool thing about the facets is that you see those really defined corners. So we don't want to lose those. We want to make sure that we're enhancing those. Now we still have a little bit more work to do. So that's a little saggier than I'd like. So I'm going to come in again, just with the warmth of my hands, nice and flat here. Really easy to do. Tiny, tiny, tiny clay project. Okay, so I am happy with that. You can see I brought everything in. And then I am going to score this bottom. And I will get the top and the bottom on. I'll show you how to put the holes on. And then we're going to talk a lot about the finishing step, which is plugging the salt and pepper shaker. That is so important. So I'm going to give enough time for us to really talk about that step. The construction of these it's so quick and very easy. And if you want to see the larger version, we just did that for ClayShareCon. So you can go back and watch the replay on ClayShare on the app or on the website. And you can see how we did the really big cup for this, like the large version of this. So that part is nice and flat. I want to make sure that my seam is taken care of. And then we are going to score around this edge as well while we have the jig in. Okay. Anytime you smush the clay, you just want to make sure that you're releasing it. So really important part about releasing the jig, if you have a clean jig, Scott is a detective, my husband, I was not washing my jigs after I was using them. So what was happening is I was accumulating just a bit of clay on the outside, and that was actually making it harder for this to release. So if you just wipe these down with a damp sponge, let them dry before you put the clay on, get your cornstarch on, you should be just fine. So releasing this guy, because it has all the ridges, keep putting my example over there, you can't twist this all the way, because if you twist all the way, these ridges here will pop into your flat sides and you'll get rid of that flat portion that we just worked so hard to get in there. So you really just want to jiggle the top just a little bit, just short twist, and then you'll feel your jig top. It will release out. So I am going to take care of my inner seams now. I'm going to pick this up. I wouldn't normally do that, but how sweet is that? So we've got all of our little defined ridges in there. I'm going to find my inside seam. We will not have an opening for this because we're going to close this completely up. So you have to make sure you take care of that inside seam at this point. If you don't do it now, you will lose access to that once you get your top and bottom. I like to just do it at this point so I don't forget. Now, I did kind of squish it. I'm going to use our mini rim cone, which is also adorable. And I'm just going to make sure, you really want to make sure that this part is in the round, because as you put your bottom on there, you want that to fit really nicely. So at this point, I am going to choose to put my top on first, and then I will do my bottom. So I'm going to set this guy off to the side. I've got my top here. With this texture that I use, it is a natural blank portion there, and I'm able to get my holes. That was just a design choice that I made. So I do want to make sure that I know where my seam is. I'm going to flip this over. My seam is back here. I want to make sure that I have this on the way I want it so the holes are facing forward. Okay, so I'm going to set this guy back there, and I'm just going to flip in reverse. And I know that when I bring this down, it will line up the way I want to. If that feels like too much brain work, you don't have to do that step. But I want to see my holes at a specific spot in this texture, and I don't want my seam to be in front. So I'm going to score this. I do have texture on the inside. You won't ever see that again. I just roll these through my slab roller. You don't have to do texture on both sides if you don't want. You'll never see it, but
Oh, I think we lost you there, Alex. Let's see if we can get her back real quick. All right, everyone, we lost Alex, unfortunately, and I'm working to get her back as soon as we can. And hang on for just a sec. I'm going to roll over to our holding image while I do that. All right, everyone, we got them back. They're having some storms out where they are, I believe. So
yeah.
we'll carry on from here. And before you get started again, Alex, I got a couple of questions that I could roll through before we get too far away.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let me see. Do you recommend any particular underglaze transfers that might fit the shakers really well?
You know, I don't do a lot with underglaze transfers, but I will look into that. I've tried all the major brands and they all work well, but as far as like shape and pattern, I would say just make sure that you're getting a transfer that would work well within the shape of the template. So I would print out the template, put it over your underglaze transfer, and then I would use that template to cut out, and then you could go over and put that there.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I see Jess do that so much with underglaze transfers.
Yeah, just use your template. Yep.
Yep. And the other one was, do you have that roller and cornstarch brush that you're using on your website?
I do. Yeah, that's a great question. If you go onto the website under our extras tab, you can see our Amazon storefront there. And then everything that I use tools that we don't provide, most everything is on there for you. So this texture mat, the brush I use for cornstarch, the brayers, the speedball brayers, they're all on there.
Awesome. And I'm guessing that you add the holes for the top and for the bottom once you get those on, and the clay is firm enough that it doesn't mush when you do it, right?
Yeah, so I will do my holes almost immediately because your clay should be firm enough to pop those holes in. If your clay is soft, what you want to prevent is this caving in. Now, there are a lot of projects that I will do where I'll pop my bottoms in. This is not one of them, unless that's your design choice. We want this to stay really flat there. So if your clay is the right consistency, you should be able to put these holes in almost immediately. And we are going to talk about how Scott had to drill through these holes because my glaze filled those holes in. I'm going to tell you all about it. We're going to talk all about that. So, but I will show you today how to pop those holes in. And I do the holes differently for the salt versus pepper shaker, and I will tell you about that as well. So I put the bottom on, which is technically our top, and all you saw me do was just take a comfortable angle and cut off all the extra from around, and then I did apply some pressure to make sure that that seam is nice and joined. Here at this, because we are not going to be able to, you can get in here still, and I don't fuss too far at this point because I really compressed this. If you want to come in and join from the inside, you can do that too. But really what we're going to do is focus on adding enough pressure on the outside. I want to get this so you can see here. All I'm doing is taking my mini shark fin tool and I'm taking it along these short flat sides. What that's going to do is compress that seam, and it's also going to pick up any extra slip that we have. You will lose texture at this point. I'll show you with my finished product. I think it's nice to have a little bit of contrast between texture and not texture, so that doesn't bother me. But if you are wanting that texture to be continuous at this point, you would just take whatever you used for your texture and apply that to these flat parts. But you don't want to skip this step. You really want to make sure that that seam is nice and compressed. And you can see here, you lose the texture at the top, but honestly, I don't think you really can even tell too much there. I would say that making sure that seam is nice and buttoned up is more important than preserving texture. So let's get the bottom on here. And the bottom is going to be, there's going to be an extra step because we've got to punch a hole through this that will allow whatever your choice is to plug up your salt and pepper shaker. I have a couple other examples here. That's just a number 10 cork. It's 20 millimeters. I got those from Amazon. Number 10 cork. And whoops, I'm going to dump my clay quick. There are other salt and pepper stoppers that you can get. These I wasn't a fan of because of the color. If I was making something that went with, I think that I would have been more apt to use these. But this just gives you an example of different stoppers that you can put in. This one's nice because it has a release tab. If you are using something like this, you'll just want to make sure that the clay is flat, so it's creating the seal so you're not losing your salt and pepper. There's also this plastic that you can use. Anything that you use, you'll want to trace out the outer edge of whatever you use, and then you're going to want to increase the hole depending on your shrinkage. So you will have to test this out. My clay shrinks 10 to 12%, the standard clay that I use. So I know that in general, I lose about half an inch of clay. So what I'm able to do is when I make my hole with the cork, I make it about 10% bigger than the cork, and then it fits just fine. So I'm going to grab here. I have just one cork that I use for making because it will get dirty. I won't ever use this for selling, but I do keep one off to the side. And not only are we worried about the circumference, you have to worry about the depth of the cork too. So if you don't pop your bottom in deep enough, your cork will fit in, but if you have it too shallow, the cork will stick up a little bit. You can cut the cork. We don't mind doing that. You can steam the cork. You can cut it to fit. That's fine. But if you don't want to fuss with cutting, you just want to make sure that it goes in deep enough. And I'll show you how to do that. So this is the cork I'll use. I have a cutter here that is the exact size of this cork. I am going to probably have Scott make one for me that's 10% bigger, so I don't have to do what I'm about to do, which is make it larger by hand. But you do want to make sure you know which side you're popping in. When you're cutting your clay out, if you're using saran wrap or press and seal, there is going to be a really nice smooth side and there's going to be a flat side. So we are going to make sure that the flat side is facing down and that as we dome this in, we're doming it with the smooth side out. I hope that makes sense. So, because we are going to pop this clay in, we're going to push it in, and the cutter that we provide is larger than the project, and that accounts for the fact that you have to push the clay into your form just a little bit. I'm going to put this guy off to the side, and what I'm going to do here is take the widest part of my cork, and I'm going to do my best to center it. If you want to measure at this point, that's great. I'm just going to push my cork into the clay to give myself an imprint there, and then I'm going to take the cutter, and I'm going to cut that out. I'm going to make a little hole here. I think maybe we might, if people are using a standard shape like this, we didn't want to add that to the cutter because if you're using different size cork, we don't want to pigeonhole you into a corner there. And then we've got this little hole we'll set off to the side and make something else with. And then we've got our bottom hole here. Now at this point, my cork should fit almost perfectly through, but we want to account for shrinkage on there. So I'm going to take the cork and I'm just going to roll it around the clay in a circular form here. You can put it down on the table. And I'm just widening this hole. I want to make sure that when I am done here, there is a gap around the cork that I'm using. I would do the same thing if I were using this plastic piece here. I would do the same thing. I'd put it down and I would kind of use that to make my hole wider. So I know I need to have a little bit more space, so I'm just going to keep, all I'm doing is putting on a flat surface and taking the cork itself to make that hole wider. That will keep your circle nice and in shape. It'll keep it nice and smooth, and then that gives you an idea of having that little bit of space around. Okay, so that's good enough for now. Now I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to score the flat part of this piece, because we are going to attach that onto the bottom. And then we will, once we put it on, stretch it in far enough so our cork has a place to nest inside of this. I'm going to add my slip. I've already scored my other piece. Add my slip here. How are we doing on time, Kevin?
Oh, you've got about 20 minutes left.
Oh, perfect. Okay, plenty of time. Okay, so before I put this on, I'm just going to put my rim cone in, make sure that that is nice and round all the way, and it is. And then we are going to put this on. It will stick out a little bit, and that's okay. I'm going to give it a little bit of pressure until I see some of the slip. I don't want to put so much pressure that we're caving in our flat sides, okay? We want to keep that, shape nice and in there. So now that I have this on here, I'm not going to put any more pressure on until we have this bottom piece where we want it. So if I left it flat, that would be fine if I had something that was going to sit flush. But as it sits right now, after I'm done firing it, the cork would stick out, it would protrude, and then you would have issues with cork touching table. We want clay to touch table before cork. So I'm going to take this and just start pushing this in. I'm just using my fingers. You could use, if you wanted to use a tool for this, I just find that pushing in, the warmth of my hands really allows the clay to flex as needed. And it will pull up from the seam here. Don't worry about that at this point. We're going to make sure that that's nice and buttoned up. So now I'm going to go, you kind of have to guesstimate at this point. I want to go to a depth where I feel like once I put this in here, we are going to have the cork sitting in further than the clay. Now, if you need to, you can cut these. So don't be too scared at this point. You just want to kind of get it in there and eyeball it. I've got a lot of room still down there, so after it's fired, I know it'll fit. So now I feel confident with how caved in this is. I'm going to now come back around and I'm going to start pushing down this seam pretty hard. Not so much that we're distorting shape, but you do want to start making sure that we're closing that up. We don't want to have any cracking or leaking. At this point, I'm going to flip it again. I'm going to take my finger. I'm going to just apply some pressure just to make sure I'm closing in any gaps. And then this is where our little shark fin comes in handy. So I'm going to wet my little 6x6 insert here. I've got my banding bat so that as we're spinning this, hopefully that'll stay nice and still. And all I'm doing at this point is closing up this bottom seam. I'm beveling in my bottom, and I'm getting ready. If I want to carve this, I can get ready for the carving. I have an example here of how I did that. I lay in a really steep angle and then I come through and carve. But with the latest here I just made, I'm going to leave it smooth. And that's how it looks when it's smooth there. And then all my glaze, I'll just glaze that all the way down to the bottom. So it's really important to erase that seam here. And it's really, really important to compress from the outside so we don't have any cracking. I need to pick up all of that wet slip to avoid any unnecessary water standing at the bottom or slippy water. That will cause cracking. We want this to be nice and dry. So at this point, I would come around. I would fuss a little bit more, but you get the idea there. Let's get to the good stuff and let's get our holes popped in. So now we've got one shaker done, and we are going to, I think we'll switch overhead so you can see our holes. I'm going to use a needle tool for this. All right, let's see if we go here. So I'm going to use a needle tool for this guy. I used to work in a restaurant, and the salt should always be on the right side. So if someone has visual impairment at a restaurant, if someone is blind or hard of sight, they should automatically know that the salt is on the right and the pepper is on the left. I don't know if anyone else was trained that way, but it makes sense to me. Also, the salt shaker traditionally has more holes than the pepper shaker, so that you have more salt coming out than pepper. You can do this any way you'd like. I've done it with 3 holes. You can do 2 holes, 1 hole. However you want to do it, just as long as your salt has more holes than your pepper here. So you can see this one, I chose to do 2 for the pepper, sit in camera here, and 3 for salt. Now this will be I'll make this our salt shaker so you can see how I put all 3 in. I'm just going to hold this up so you all can see. I just find the middle. Now I've got my flat side here. My seam is in back. I've got this nice bare spot here. I'm going to poke my needle tool in gently, not so much that I'm caving this in, just enough to get that hole in there. And then you're going to want to take your needle tool and you're going to want to rock this around. This hole needs to be much bigger than you think it needs to be. You don't want your glaze to get caught in there. So what I did not do with the salt and pepper shaker you see on my table is when I glazed, I just kind of blew the glaze through the hole, but I didn't take a brush or anything to get the glaze out of the hole. Mistake. So now we learn, we know better and we do better. So Scott had to drill those with a diamond bit to get my glaze. It was just barely covering the hole, but just barely covering the hole still won't allow anything to come out. So there we have 3 holes for our salt shaker. I will smooth this over with a sponge. You don't want any sharpness on the inside. It doesn't matter because there will be no contact with hands on the inside there. And then there we have our salt shaker. So we'll come back to, let's come back to the front camera.
Yeah, I got a few questions for you.
Yeah.
So we'll start with the cork. What size cork did you say that was?
Okay, so Amazon, it's a size 10 number. So this pound sign number 10, not hashtag 10. I also have these linked on our website, but size 10 ends up being 20 millimeters. So I just put in, when I order these, I put size 10 corks, and then this is what I get. Awesome. You can also get corks that go really tiny ones. So if you want to put your cork hole in the back and you want to make this part solid on the bottom, you could just get those tiny ones that plug in. You could plug in from the back. There's some really cool salt and pepper shaker designs. The reason why I like the cork is if my hole isn't exact, I have a lot of leeway here. So yeah. It fits a lot. There's a lot of room for error when you use cork. And because you can cut these down, even if it sticks out a little bit, you can sand or cut them down to size. Try to cut this inner part so no one sees it. But if you have to cut your wider part, that's fine too. Okay, go ahead.
And then, and of course, it'll probably differ depending on your clay and its shrink rate. But question about the size of the cutter that you use for the initial hole for that cork.
Sure. I'll get this guy, the cork hole.
Yeah.
I'll have Scott measure that for you. This came out of a different set. We didn't make that one. So I'll let you know what size that is. I actually would use one a size just a smidge larger than that. So then I'm not having to create that bigger size with my, by rolling the cork around. I would love to just get to the point where I have a cutter It fits perfectly. I cut the hole out and I'm done. And I will work on that. So
Yeah,
eventually there will be a size for that.
yeah, there's definitely that
Inch
would
and
be
an eighth.
really cool is to have
Yeah,
cutters
the exact.
cutters
So
for a
the
size 10
reason,
cork for a X
yeah,
shrink rate clay, right?
yeah. But Kevin, they have to test. You guys have to test, right? Like
Yeah.
I would love to do all that math for you. This is an inch and an eighth. Inch and an eighth is what I'm using, and it lines up perfectly with the top of the size 10. Um, but depending on, even if you use standard 266 and you did, yours might come out different than mine because there's so many variables. But what we will do is have a cutter to get you started. We will have something that goes with this size cork that I use. But I think that a lot of people are going to use different, different stoppers,
Yeah.
or even a cork that's smaller than this or a cork that's larger, so whatever you're going to use, I like using whatever, like if this is the cork I'm using, that's why I use this to start the hole, because I know if this widest part fits through, if I can get that in there through my glaze firing, then I won't have any issues if I've used. It's kind of like when you make an oil cruet or a hand soap pump. If you're using the actual dispenser to make the hole and then go larger from there, it makes it a lot easier to measure that.
Yeah. And then
Okay.
the
More questions?
last one that I
Yeah.
have right now is which size of your rim cones are you using on that?
This is our mini.
Okay.
It's adorable. Yeah, this is our mini will fit on the top and the bottom. We are working on getting minis that are the facet shape too. So as we're using our faceted jigs, because you can put a round one in here, you just don't want to twist it too much. You don't want to get rid of those flat sides that we made. So, but this takes the mini. And we fill it with salt and fill it with pepper and make delicious things to eat. I don't think I missed anything. Anything, babe? All right. Any other questions, Kevin?
No.
You take your time. I know you're a one-man show tonight, so.
Suzanne wants to know, where do you get your standard clay?
Oh, yeah. So here in Waukesha, Wisconsin, my local clay supplier, the Potter's Shop, they're just about 2 miles up the road. That's where I get my clay from.
Yeah.
I think we found out where Standard was out of, Pennsylvania. So I think Standard Clay Company, if you're close, and then I was able to use the engobes on the Standard 266, and I was able to use my Celadon. Because with the clay I use, the dark clay, because this is the dark clay here, this is the Standard 266, it eats up. I can't put Celadon on here. And then with my speckled tan, it also eats up the glaze. So with the use of Mako's engobes, you can use some lighter clay or some lighter glaze colors on there. And then I'm using, this is Mako Birch on this guy, this example here.
Yeah, that's really pretty.
Yeah, thanks. Which goes cream. I know everyone always asks. So these are my different clay bodies. So this is on my speckled tan, the 112, and then this is the same glaze, the Mako Birch on the 266. So that's a little bit of a, you can have fun effects that way using different things.
Awesome. I think we're
Yeah.
all set. PSH makes a threader for bottles. That could potentially work
Sure.
for these as
I did
well.
see that. Yeah, I saw they did for soap dispensers. I just saw that they do one. Are they out of the UK, PSH?
I don't know.
I think they may be. I thought I saw that. I did see that was definitely a good idea. I'm really interested to see. I'm going to start maybe putting the cork at the top too, because you can get just tiny cork stoppers, and that might be easier to fill too. Oh, for filling, I didn't even mention that. So to fill this, if people are wondering, you would just cover up the whole top of the cork and then fill it in, and it's just easy as that, like you would do normally with a salt and pepper shaker.
I like the idea of trying a smaller cork on one of the faceted sides and having it become a design element that you actually see. That could be really cool.
I think so too. Yeah, I think there's a million ways that you can stop this up. So I'm going to play around with that. I think it's a lot of fun. And I know people will make it their own. We always get pictures and people, someone was using our nesting mug jigs as, to make salt pigs. And that was so cool. So people will come up with some really cool ideas, some really neat ways to do that.
PSH is out of Canada.
Canada. Okay. Sorry, Canada. I just remember there being like an issue with getting it in the United States and what that was. So, and then we will be also doing this. We will do this project live at Fired Arts. So we will be there, hopefully close to Jess again. We were right across from her last year. And this is one of the projects that we'll be doing. So if you don't try this before August and you want to try it with me in person, then this will be one of the things that we're doing there for Fired Arts in August. I think the 14th through the 17th or something like that.
Oh, that'll be cool.
Yeah. And then our tools will be at NCECA. We will not this year. We're looking to do it next year, but our tools will be there. So keep an eye out for those. That's pretty exciting.
Awesome. I think we're pretty much covered. The one thing I need you to do is remind everyone of your code and your website.
Yeah. Okay. So alexandriapotteryco.com, and the code is Shaker15, and it's the 5th through the 10th. So you have a few days to do that. And that will be, it's not just for the salt and pepper shaker set. Say that 10 times fast. It's for all the tools on the website. So you can go ahead and pop that code in, and it will take 15% off your entire order. And if you have any questions, please reach out. Please email us and ask. We're also on social. You guys can find us, Alexandria Pottery Tools, Alexandria Pottery, or Alexandria Pottery Co. We're everywhere. You'll find us. And if you need anything, just reach out and we can help out.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Alex. We appreciate you
You're so welcome.
coming in and saving Wednesday for us.
Yeah, no, we're happy to do it. We'll give Jess some time off. You don't get any time, Kevin. You get to hang out with us still, but no, we're happy to help. It's always fun to be here with you guys.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Alex. Bye-bye.
You're welcome, dear.
All right, everyone. That is a wrap on Live at 5. Thanks again to Alex for popping in at very short notice and doing a lovely demo for us. And make sure you check out alexandriapotteryco.com, and I will make sure that I add the discount code and the dates and the template for this to this video for replay. So if you're watching it later on clayshare.com, you won't have to go any further to find the rest of the info that goes with it. Thanks, everyone. Have a safe and wonderful Wednesday. And I will see I'll see our Clayshare Premium members on Monday morning for Good Morning Clayshare. I'm going to do a new platform Q&A. So if you have questions about the platform, if you're having issues, swing in and see me on Monday morning. Bye, everyone.